"You're paranoid," my husband said of my daughter's fears. Then police found cameras everywhere. The footage led to his own sister. I was making breakfast in my home, a white-walled two-story house, out on the edge of San Jose, California, as the sun came up. From my kitchen, I looked out the window at the trees in my yard. The sun's soft morning glow lit up the fruit bowl that sat on the kitchen counter. "Zoe, are you awake?" I hollered up the stairs while I carefully poured pancake batter. This morning time was important to me. It was a chance to connect with my family since I work from home as a freelance graphic designer. "Yeah," came the reply, and then I heard footsteps running down the stairs. My 13-year-old daughter, Zoe, who just begun middle school, appeared with a hint of growing up showing on her face. She walked into the kitchen, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail as she adjusted her school uniform. I asked, "You have ballet lessons after school today, don't you?" Zoe nodded, a bit restless. Lately, she'd started showing signs of becoming a teenager, but she always went to her ballet and swimming lessons. When I looked at her, I saw glimpses of myself when I was young. "Where's Dad?" Zoe asked. "He already left for work," I said. "He'll be home late again today," I answered, a little bit lonely. My husband, Brian, is a software developer who works at a big IT company in Sylvia Valley. Sometimes, his highly organized and earnest personality caused him to be overly devoted to his job. It was typical for him to get home after 9 o'clock most weeknights. I recall when we first met 8 years back at a friend's wedding. Back then, I was a single mom, there with my 5-year-old Zoe. I can still perfectly remember how Brian, seeing that Zoe looked sleepy during the reception, had very kindly helped her drift off to sleep on a couch. We were married after dating for a year. Brian cherished Zoe just as though she was his own child, and our little family of 3 experienced a quiet contentment. But there was someone who was against our marriage from the beginning, Brian's sister, Rebecca. Rebecca, who used to be an elementary school teacher, had stopped working 3 years ago due to ongoing migraines. Even though she wasn't married and appeared nice, she did tend to be a bit controlling. She visited her brother's family frequently, particularly lately, almost always showing up on weekends. "Is Aunt Rebecca coming this weekend again?" Zoe asked during breakfast, without sounding particularly happy. "Yes, probably," I responded, being a bit noncommittal. My relationship with my sister-in-law, who wasn't even my mother-in-law, was always walking a tightrope. Brian really loved his sister, which made it impossible to tell her no. After eating, I drove Zoe to school. Then I started my workday in my home office. Even with the graphic design work frequently demanding I meet strict deadlines, working remotely was essential to manage the duties of parenting, like school runs and taking care of my home. During the afternoons, in between those virtual meetings, I would fold clothes and start prepping for our evening meal. As I cooked, I would sometimes glance outside the large window. In the backyard, the wooden deck Brian had constructed the previous year sat. We would sometimes eat family brunches out there during holidays. I treasured these little everyday bursts of joy. In the evenings, I had to drive Zoe to her ballet classes and pick her up. After I picked up my daughter from her class, I saw that her usually cheerful face seemed a bit down. Even when I asked, "What's the matter?" Zoe simply replied, "Nothing." I felt a mother's concern, wondering if this was typical of teenage years or maybe something more. Brian got home after 9 p.m. when he said, "I'm home." Zoe came racing out of her room and gave her father a hug. Brian, though he appeared a little tired, gently stroked his daughter's hair. The 3 of us ate dinner late, chatting about our day. It looked like we had the perfect family life on the surface. However, a little bit of worry had begun to grow in a corner of my heart, Rebecca's more and more frequent visits, the way Zoe was acting. And sometimes, this unexplainable feeling of disquiet. Even so, I concentrated on keeping our daily life serene. At this time, it was impossible for me to foresee how much my everyday existence was about to be disrupted. The alterations had slowly crept into our otherwise ordinary schedule. One night, I was busy with my math problems in my bedroom, and all of a sudden I stopped writing. Something felt off about the atmosphere in my room. A feeling like someone was standing behind me made goosebumps erupt on my skin. When I spun around, there was nothing there at all. Only the drapes moving gently because of the fatting light. Was it the air conditioner or maybe a breeze from the outdoors? It's merely my mind playing tricks, definitely just my imagination, I assured myself as I went back to the book. Yet from that day onward, undeniable changes began. This uneasy feeling every time I sat at my desk, the heavy feeling in the air that seemed to hang behind me, the sense that someone was there. It got more intense once the sun went down. My room was at the end of the 2nd floor, and I could look out at the oak tree in the yard. That view, which was supposed to be soothing, now felt unsettling. That strange feeling was constant, no matter if the curtains were open or shut. A few days later, when I got out of bed to go to the bathroom at night, I thought I heard some quiet footsteps in the hallway on the 2nd floor. The clock said it was 2 a.m. There was no question that my folks were asleep at this hour. As I paused to identify the sound, I could feel small vibrations through the floorboards. Even though I stared intently into the darkness of the hallway, I couldn't see a thing. Still, something was definitely there. With my heart pounding, I dashed back to my room. I just couldn't seem to get any rest when I went into my bedroom. Even when the sun was up, this odd feeling wouldn't go away. It felt especially strong in the living room, like someone was looking right at me. No matter if I was watching television or scrolling through my phone, I felt as though someone was keeping an eye on me from someplace. Even with the sun shining brightly through the big windows and the familiar furniture all around, something just didn't seem right. It felt as though an unfamiliar person was quietly hiding in a corner of the room. It was on a Saturday afternoon when I finally decided to tell my mom about how I was feeling. It was a rare weekend when Rebecca wasn't around, so it was just Mom and me enjoying a peaceful time together. "Mom, lately I've been feeling weird," I started to say, a little unsure, and Jessica gave me a kind smile. "When you're going through puberty, it's common to experience things like that," Jessica said gently as she softly touched my hair. But even what my mom said couldn't entirely get rid of my anxious feelings. If anything, those worries became even more intense every single day. And then, around 6 p.m. on a weekday, the significant moment happened. It was out of the ordinary, but Brian had sent a message that he was coming home earlier that day. He'd finally finished a preliminary report on a big project and could have dinner with us. Mom and I were just chilling on the couch in the living room, waiting to start making dinner. The soft light of twilight was coming through the windows. The trees in the garden made quiet shadows under the slightly orange sky. Our favorite drama was on TV, being shown again. It was a quiet scene between my daughter and me, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. All of a sudden, Zoe's grip tightened on my arm. I could feel her fingers shaking, and I spun around to look at her face, completely taken aback. The normal sparkle in her eyes was gone, and instead she looked incredibly scared and worried. Her complexion was ashen, and her lips were trembling. "Mom, I think someone is watching us," Zoe whispered, her voice wavering. At that instant, a strange feeling of dread washed over me, too. The garden was already shrouded in darkness outside, with only the streetlights providing some glow. Even though I thoroughly examined the entire room, nothing appeared out of place, but something just felt off. The atmosphere felt thick, like we were being watched. After that, Zoe's behavior shifted quickly. She stopped eating dinner with her usual enthusiasm. Even my special lasagna, which she normally loved, remained mostly uneaten. She started having trouble sleeping at night. Nightmares began waking her up more frequently. Because she didn't want to be alone in her room, she spent more time in my office. Even while doing her homework, she seemed restless and less close to me. She also began to dread ballet lessons. "Can I skip today?" she would ask. As a mom, it was heartbreaking to witness the joy slowly disappearing from my daughter's eyes. Zoe has been putting up a brave face. Recently, she mentioned her worries to Brian one evening after he got home from his job. The dinner table was still mostly full of uneaten food. Yet his reaction surprised me. He said, without even glancing up from his computer, that all kids go through this phase when they're growing up. "Lots of people I work with also chat about their parenting problems," Brian replied. He was so engrossed in something important that he didn't seem to realize his daughter was changing. The figures on his screen appeared to matter more than the family issue that was right there. Surprisingly, it was Rebecca who was the most understanding of these changes. Over the weekend, when she saw Zoe's listless attitude, she spoke to her gently. Rebecca sat on the sofa and softly put her hand on her niece's shoulder. "I could sleep over. We could chat, just you and me." On the outside, it seemed like a nice thing to offer. But when I heard those words, a small alarm went off inside of me. There appeared to be something more hidden in Rebecca's eyes. Even though it was a fleeting feeling, something definitely felt off. Why would she suddenly want to stay over when she was already coming over often? This feeling of discomfort kept bothering me. It was late at night. Moonlight was softly coming through the big windows in the living room. I sat on the sofa, lost in thought. I thought about my daughter's worry, my husband's lack of concern, and my sister-in-law's strange interest. It feels like the pieces are slowly coming together, making some sort of design. But the entire image was still unclear, hidden in obscurity. "Mom, can I sleep in your room tonight?" I heard a small voice from the upstairs. Zoe was looking down from the staircase's top step. She looked exactly as she used to when she was younger. I quietly agreed. And in fact, she did. She looked just like she did when she was small. I still hadn't figured it out yet. That this feeling of worry would shortly deeply disrupt our family. The night wind outside the window whispered through the trees. The trees' shadows made strange designs on the home's walls. Without anyone seeing, watchful eyes must have been watching us. I woke up earlier than I normally do that morning. The clock indicated it was 5 a.m. Zoe was sleeping quietly beside me. How long had it been since I slept in the same bed as my daughter? Allowing it lately because of her recent anxiety, it seemed like she'd finally gotten some good sleep. I quietly got out of bed. I moved into the dimly lit hallway and took a look at the house differently than the night before. Something wasn't right. I made up my mind to search every inch of the house this morning to locate what was off. First, the second-floor hallway, where Zoe first felt something was off. Walking carefully along the wall, I paid attention to even tiny marks and imperfections that I would usually overlook. As the morning sun slowly climbed, weak sunlight started entering the windows. And then my eye saw. I noticed a tiny opening in the wall. This felt like a monumental discovery. I fought back the desire to scream. The hole was maybe 2 millimeters across. Initially, it looked like it could have been caused by a pushpin. Nevertheless, upon a closer inspection, there was something reflective within. When I shone my phone's light into it, there was undeniably what seemed to be a lens sparkling. I was completely petrified. My daughter's worries hadn't been made up. Someone was definitely spying on them. Right inside their own home, I took a deep breath trying to get myself together. I couldn't freak out. I had to secure any proof. I carefully photographed the lens I'd found with my phone. I also snapped a few pictures of the entire hallway to show the location. After that, I carried on my search downstairs, right beside the living room bookcase, close to the kitchen counter and on the landing of the stairs. I kept uncovering little holes. I took pictures of each spot, struggling to keep my shaky hands from betraying me. It was 6:30 in the morning. It was almost time for Zoe to get up. I had to begin preparing breakfast. I put on a facade of calmness as I stood in the kitchen. While I made the pancakes, a bunch of questions flooded my mind. What was their motive? How long had it been happening? And what should I do about it? "Good morning, Mom," Zoe said, looking drowsy. "Good morning. Did you sleep okay?" I answered in a normal tone as much as I could. My daughter appeared a little less anxious than she had the previous evening. It was the regular breakfast routine. The usual chat filled with smiles. Yet inside, Jessica felt a complete mess. She knew those cameras were still recording them somewhere in the house. It hadn't occurred to her how tough it would be to act normal knowing about it. The clock showed 8:15 in the morning. I drove Zoe to school like I always did. "Have a good day," I said, smiling. As soon as I was back in the car, I grabbed my phone. I looked up directions to the San Jose Police Department. I got to the police station after 9 a.m. After a quick word at the front desk. They paged Detective Sarah Martinez right away. Her warm face was lit up with shrewd eyes. "Could you fill me in?" she asked. I was brought to a private room, and I explained everything from what I'd found that morning to everything that had been going on. I described my daughter's nervous behavior, the sounds during the night, and the many cameras I'd found. I told her the story as calmly as I could, showing her the pictures on my phone. Detective Martinez occasionally nodded, jotting down important details. "You've been through something awful," she said, and I could feel tears well up. All the feelings I'd been fighting so hard to hold back for the past several hours suddenly overflowed. "Let me tell you how we'll handle this," the detective began, keeping her voice level. The main focus right now was protecting any evidence. The pictures I'd taken of the cameras were sent straight to the digital forensics team. After that, we needed to check out the house. I'm trying to figure out where cameras are, tracking where data is going, and gathering fingerprints. I was asked about who could get into my house. At that point, I told the detective about our everyday lives. I described when my husband comes home, my daughter's school schedule, and how often Rebecca visits. When I said that name, I noticed a subtle shift in the detective's face. "An investigative team will be here later today. Would you mind going about things as usual if you can?" Detective Martinez kept talking, making sure to say things carefully. "We don't want to give the person responsible any warning, so please try not to let on that you've figured something out." I just nodded in agreement. Driving back to my car, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. I was relieved that my earlier worries and panic had been validated, and I felt reassured knowing that I had professional help now. But at the same time, fresh worries were starting to grow. What would the upcoming investigation unearth? How would those discoveries affect my family? As I turned on the ignition, I took a big, deep breath. Right now, I decided I would only focus on keeping my daughter safe. It was 10 a.m. on the clock. I had 5 hours. I needed to get myself together before Zoe got home from school. Detective Martinez called at 6:15 that evening after Zoe had gone upstairs. "Mrs. Watson, we've made some important progress," she said, her voice a mix of confidence and care. My hands were still trembling as I answered the phone. My mind was blown by what the investigative team found during their search of the house. They uncovered a shocking number of cameras, a grand total of 6. They were all placed in hidden locations to monitor every aspect of what the family did. There was one camera positioned near the living room's bookshelf. It was aimed to capture a view of the whole space. Another camera was situated near the kitchen counter. It was focused on recording how the family prepared their meals. One more was in the stairway landing, perfect for keeping tabs on people moving between floors. There was also one in the second-floor hallway, watching for activity during the night. What really made my jaw drop was that they found two cameras close to Zoe's room. One of them was watching the room itself from the hallway, and the other one was placed inside the room, watching anyone entering or leaving. Each of these cameras had been expertly placed inside the walls with equipment only a professional would possess. The wiring was handled with skill, a job that takes advanced skills. The detective went on to say that the security footage held the key to the puzzle. The footage showed that Rebecca had been visiting the house very often on weekdays. Most notably, she was often seen carrying a small tool bag. She would go through the back door trying to avoid the neighbors, and it looked like she was working on something inside the house. Occasionally, she would spend longer than an hour. We also figured out where all the camera data was going. A technical examination revealed the truth. All of the camera footage was connected to Rebecca's IP address. This complex system had been set up to send live footage directly to her phone. I made sure the video was scrambled and stored safely online in the cloud. This investigation had been thought out very carefully on a scale that was unbelievable. That evening, around 10 o'clock, the police took Rebecca into custody at her place. When they went in with the warrant, her room was full of screens showing live feeds from Jessica's home. External hard drives full of old recordings were stacked up on her bed. Surprisingly, when they arrested her, Rebecca didn't fight back at all. It was as if she'd been expecting this. While being questioned, Rebecca started spilling everything. Her admission uncovered a darkness that was far worse than anybody had guessed. Rebecca's mom had died in a car crash when she was 5. Ever since, she'd tried so hard to be a mother to her younger brother, Brian. When she got home from school, she would take care of her little brother first. Cooking dinner, helping with his schoolwork, putting him to sleep. Their dad was always working, and so little Rebecca ended up becoming the heart of the family. I felt it was my responsibility to look after that family, she said during her interrogation, and her words were a blend of twisted love and fixation. Brian was basically my kid, to have him taken away by another woman. In her view, Jessica was just stealing something that belonged to her. Even Zoe's presence was difficult for her to deal with. Her frequent headaches had caused her mental state to become even more shaky. The dependence she had developed on the painkillers she'd been prescribed had grown as well. Her dream of a perfect family was making the separation from reality even bigger. Her rationale for putting up surveillance cameras seemed to be her warped way of keeping the family safe. At the police station, in the visiting area, Brian was utterly destroyed when he learned the reality of the situation. The reason? His sister. His words seemed to be forced out, and his eyes were filled with profound sorrow. He had an endless amount of love for the sister who had practically brought him up from when he was a kid. It was an unimaginable act of treachery from that same sister. He felt terrible because he hadn't protected his wife and child. Even the cops who were there were touched by how he was sobbing, just like a little boy. When Brian got back home, Jessica and Zoe quietly greeted him. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so incredibly sorry." He went down on his knees and bent over at the waist. He was filled with self-reproach for not noticing the problems in his family since he'd been so wrapped up in his work. He felt helpless because he hadn't picked up on his sister's odd actions. He continued to cry and apologize over and over. Watching this unfold, Jessica realized she needed to make a critical choice. She decided she wouldn't place any blame on her husband. In this situation, there was only one person at fault, and everyone else was a victim. His daughter, who'd been terrified of Rebecca's distorted affections, was a victim. Her husband, whose heart had been broken by his sister's deceit, was a victim. And Rebecca herself, whose mental health had taken a turn, was a victim. "We'll face this together," Jessica said, putting her hand on his shoulder. Zoe came over to her dad timidly and put her face against his back. Maybe this difficult time would actually bring them all closer together. Rebecca was going to go through a rigorous mental health assessment and get the specific treatment that she needed. "I'm concerned that the medication she's taking for her migraines might have seriously affected her ability to make sound decisions. But what mattered most was the profound solitude and feeling of emptiness that lived inside her. The burden of duties she'd shouldered since childhood had, over time, changed her. I'm thinking we should do everything possible to assist your sister in getting better," I murmured quietly to my spouse. Instead of allowing bitterness and rage to take over, let's opt for empathy and pardon. Making that choice wasn't simple, yet I felt it was ultimately the best course of action for everyone. All the cameras were gone and the most advanced security system was put in place. Her physical safety was ensured. Even so, mending emotional hurts would still be a slow process. We, as a family, agreed to attend counseling sessions consistently. Zoe's mental well-being became our main focus. After about a month passed, Zoe's smile began to reappear little by little. She started going back to her ballet classes. Nobody is looking now. Whenever my daughter would ask with some nervousness, I'd give her a solid nod. It's all right. Keeping you safe is what we're here for. The spring sun shone brightly through the windows. With the changing of the seasons, I was sure our family's healing journey was taking place bit by bit. The damage to the walls was all repaired, and we put up fresh wallpaper. Although visible wounds could vanish, working through the emotional ones still required time. Despite this, our family relationships would definitely become closer because of everything we'd been through. I thought of this as I quietly looked at the family photo sitting near the window. 3 months have already gone by. Rebecca is still getting care at the state mental health center. Brian tells me during his visits each week that he sees flashes of the kind sister he used to know coming back. The new migraine treatments are starting to make a difference, and she's slowly getting better from the drug issues. Our family, the 3 of us, still goes to counseling every single week. Zoe, who was so quiet at first, can now talk about what she feels without holding back. She says things like, "I was so afraid, and I didn't understand," then always follows it up with, "But I'm all right now." Even though it was a little, that feeling was for me a sure sign of improving health. I can see the status of the house anytime through my phone because of the new security system. It's kind of strange. It's a good thing, unlike the other stuff. Brian's changed how he works, too. He works from home 2 days a week now, making a real effort to spend more time with us. Family time. Family time. It's become part of our daily routine after we eat dinner. And tonight, we are all going as a family to see Zoe's ballet show. Our daughter's been excited since the morning, wanting to show off what she's been working so hard on. It will probably take a while for our hearts to heal completely, but we're moving in the right direction for sure. "Let's go," I said with a smile as I called out. Our family's shoes all lined up at the door, ready for new beginnings. There are times when the toughest challenges actually strengthen the ties between people. I understood this because I'd lived it myself.